Life Stories brings you a heartwarming tale of unexpected kindness, vulnerability, and love that transcends wealth and status. In a quiet diner on a rainy evening, two strangers cross paths, and what begins with a simple act of generosity turns into a life-changing journey. Ethan, a humble mechanic, and Olivia, a successful businesswoman hiding her true identity, will discover the power of honesty and the importance of seeing each other for who they truly are. Join us as we unfold this touching story of connection, understanding, and love. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories and begin the journey with us today. The rain tapped gently against the windows of the small diner, a rhythmic beat that seemed to match the quiet hum of the world outside. The kind of evening when the streets were empty, the sky darkened, and the air was filled with the scent of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon. Inside, the soft glow of the dim lights gave the place a comforting warmth. A refuge from the wet and cold of the world beyond. It was the sort of place where time seemed to slow, where the hustle of life outside could be forgotten, even if just for a moment. Ethan sat alone at his usual corner booth, the only one who seemed to enjoy the solitude of the diner that night. His hands were still stained with grease from his long shift at the garage. His worn denim jacket hung over the back of the chair, damp from the rain. He had worked tirelessly all day, fixing engines and tires, but the exhaustion was the kind he had grown used to. It was the type of weariness that felt oddly comforting, familiar. He held a chipped coffee mug in his hands, taking slow sips as his tired eyes wandered around the diner. Soft jazz played from the corner speaker, blending with the low murmur of hushed conversations. The diner was a quiet sanctuary for Ethan, a place where no one asked questions, and no one cared to pry into his life. But tonight, something was different. Across the room, at the far end of the diner, sat Olivia. She was a striking figure, though she seemed out of place. Her arms were tightly folded across her chest as she gazed out the window at the rain. Her face distant and withdrawn. There was no trace of the polished confidence she usually carried. Nothing of the elegance that came with being a successful businesswoman. Instead, she wore a simple gray hoodie, jeans, and sneakers, far from the designer labels and expensive attire that defined her everyday life. She didn't belong here, at least not in the way she was used to belonging. She had come here on impulse, driven by the need to escape, to find a moment of quiet away from the relentless demands of her high-powered career. The weight of constant meetings, expectations, and the ever-present image she had to maintain had become suffocating. And tonight, she just wanted to disappear. She had ordered the simplest meal on the menu, a bowl of tomato soup and a side of toast. The meal sat half-finished in front of her, untouched. She wasn't really hungry, but it was something to occupy her hands, to distract her from the whirlwind of thoughts swirling inside her mind. For the first time in years, she felt normal. She didn't have to pretend to be someone she wasn't. No one here knew who she was or what her life entailed. And for once, that felt like a relief. But then, as she reached into her bag to pay, a sinking feeling washed over her. Her wallet was gone. She searched through her coat pockets in desperation, but it wasn't there either. Her pulse quickened, a flush of embarrassment spreading across her face. She could feel the eyes of the few other customers in the diner, the quiet judgment of their gaze weighing on her. Though no one spoke, Ethan watched from his booth, a silent observer at first. He assumed it was just another awkward misunderstanding, something that happened from time to time in places like this. But as he watched, he noticed something more, a tension in Olivia's face, a nervous tremor in her fingers as she rifled through her pockets again and again. It wasn't that she was avoiding payment. She was genuinely distressed, caught in a moment of vulnerability that she had worked so hard to avoid for so long. Ethan felt a quiet stir of empathy. He could see it in her eyes. She wasn't used to this, to being in a position where she couldn't just fix things with money or charm. And he understood that feeling all too well. Without thinking, Ethan stood from his booth and walked over to the counter. He could hear the soft shuffle of her feet as she stood to face the waiter. A young man with an impatient frown. "Everything all right, ma'am?" he asked. his tone polite but with an unmistakable edge of annoyance. "I'm so sorry," Olivia stammered, forcing a tight smile, her voice barely audible. "I must have forgotten my wallet. I can come back tomorrow and pay." But the waiter wasn't having it. "We have a policy. Payment is due before leaving. No exceptions," he said firmly, turning his back as if dismissing her. The moment hung heavy in the air. Ethan could see Olivia's discomfort. The way her shoulders slumped. The way she struggled to keep her composure. He couldn't let this go on. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. "Hey," he said, his words calm and steady, though he wasn't sure why he was even speaking up. "I've got it," he offered, pulling out a few crumpled bills from his own wallet. The kind of cash that came from a life of simplicity and hard work. Olivia turned toward him, eyes wide with surprise. "No, please," she said quickly, shaking her head. "I can't let you do that. It's not necessary." Ethan held up a hand, stopping her. "It's just a bowl of soup," he said gently, offering her a reassuring smile. "Really, everyone has bad days. No need to make a big deal out of it." He handed the money to the waiter, who accepted it with a nod before walking away without another word. Olivia stood still for a moment, stunned. No one had ever done something like that for her before, not without expecting something in return. She wasn't used to this kind of kindness. Not the kind that didn't come with strings attached. When she finally found her voice, it was soft, almost hesitant. "You didn't have to do that," she murmured, looking at him with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. "I could have figured it out." Ethan shrugged, his expression easy. "I know, but sometimes it's nice to let someone else help. Trust me, I've been there." He smiled at her again. A simple gesture that somehow felt like a lifeline. A quiet act of empathy that spoke volumes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Olivia hesitated, unsure whether she should explain herself or simply leave. The vulnerability she felt was raw. Too much to bear right now. Instead, she grabbed a napkin and scribbled something down with the pen she always kept on hand. She slid it across the table to him, folding it in a way that kept the message private. "Thank you," she said softly before rising, her movements a little stiff. Ethan watched her leave, his thoughts swirling as the sound of the bell above the door chimed softly behind her. She stepped out into the rain, disappearing into the night. When he unfolded the napkin, his eyes widened slightly. Written on it was a simple message: "I owe you. Please let me make this right." And beneath it, a phone number. Ethan stared at the note for a long moment, a quiet smile tugging at the corners of his lips. He didn't know who she really was. And he didn't care. All he knew was that he had done something small for someone who needed it. And in doing so, he had started something neither of them would ever forget. The days that followed their brief encounter at the diner seemed to pass in a blur for both Ethan and Olivia. Their lives, so different and yet strangely intertwined, continued on their separate paths, each carrying the weight of their own struggles. For Olivia, it was a constant battle to balance her high-profile career with her need for authenticity. For Ethan, it was the grind of everyday life, working long hours at the garage, trying to save enough to make his dream of owning his own place a reality. Neither one had expected what was about to unfold. It wasn't long before Olivia returned to the diner. She had thought about Ethan and the kindness he had shown her more than she cared to admit. His simple act had lingered in her thoughts like a warm memory, one she hadn't known she needed. That evening, as the weather had turned crisp and the sky was a fading orange, she found herself sitting in the same corner booth, the one she had chosen when she wanted to be invisible. She wasn't sure why she was back, only that she couldn't shake the feeling that she needed to see him again. Perhaps to thank him properly, or perhaps because, for the first time in a long while, she felt she needed someone to see her, not the version of herself that everyone else saw, but the person she was beneath the wealth and the expectations. Ethan was there, as usual, sitting in his booth, sipping his coffee and reading a paperback novel. When he saw her walk in, something stirred inside him. He didn't know what it was about her. Maybe it was her quiet grace. Or maybe the fact that she had already left an impression on him. Whatever it was, he didn't mind her company. He offered her a small, casual smile when she approached. But it was clear something was different about her this time. Her face was softer, less guarded than before. "Hi," Olivia said, a nervous smile playing on her lips. "Do you mind if I join you?" Ethan blinked, slightly taken off guard by her sudden reappearance, but nodded quickly. "Sure, of course," he replied, moving his book aside to make room for her. They exchanged pleasantries as she slid into the seat across from him. A quiet tension lingering between them. "I wanted to come back and thank you properly," Olivia began, her voice steady but still carrying a hint of uncertainty. She placed a plain envelope on the table between them. "You didn't have to pay for my meal the other night. But you did, and I appreciate that more than you know." Ethan shrugged modestly, his expression unchanged. "It wasn't a big deal. You looked like you were having a rough time. And we've all been there." He gave a small chuckle, his eyes softening as he spoke. But Olivia didn't seem satisfied with that answer. She pushed the envelope toward him again. "Please, take it, I owe you." Ethan frowned as he glanced down at the envelope. It contained cash, far more than the cost of a bowl of soup. "This is too much," he said, shaking his head. "I didn't do it for money." "I know," she said, her voice gentle, "but I want to show you how much your kindness meant to me. It wasn't just about the meal, it was about feeling like someone cared. Someone treated me like a person for once." Her words hit him harder than he expected. Ethan wasn't used to hearing people speak so openly about their vulnerability. He had never really thought about it, but it occurred to him that perhaps Olivia wasn't as invincible as she seemed. Maybe, just maybe, she was more like him than he realized. They continued talking, easing into conversation with a newfound sense of comfort. They talked about their jobs, their lives, and their dreams. Olivia told him that she worked in business consulting, a career that didn't fulfill her the way she had hoped, but it helped people in ways that made her feel like she was contributing. Ethan, on the other hand, had always dreamed of owning a small local garage, a place where people trusted him with their cars. A place that felt like home. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. For a brief moment, Olivia felt a connection, something that transcended the life she was running from. Ethan's simplicity, his sincerity, his dreams, they made her feel like she could be herself. Something she hadn't felt in years. Ethan, in turn, was drawn to her quiet grace. The way she listened without judgment, as though truly seeing him for who he was. But as the night wore on, the undercurrent of unspoken truths remained. Olivia wanted to share more, to tell him who she really was. But the vulnerability was too raw. She wasn't ready, not yet, and so, she took the napkin, scribbled her number on it, and slid it across the table with a quiet, "Thank you," before leaving. Ethan watched her leave, his thoughts swirling. Something had shifted between them. Something neither of them fully understood yet. The days that passed after Olivia's visit to the diner were filled with a sense of quiet confusion. Ethan couldn't shake the memory of their conversation. He'd never expected someone like Olivia, so poised, so seemingly perfect, to sit across from him and talk so openly about her life, her struggles, and her need to feel seen. He found himself thinking about her more often than he cared to admit. But there was something about that night that left him unsettled. He had noticed how guarded she was, how she seemed to wear her vulnerability like armor. On her end, Olivia had spent the days reflecting on their time together as well. Ethan's kindness had stayed with her, a gentle reminder of the simplicity she'd long forgotten. She had spent so many years being defined by her wealth and status that, at times, she had lost track of who she really was. And yet, when she was with him, she didn't have to be anything but herself. For the first time in a long while, she had felt safe, seen, and appreciated without any strings attached. But it also left her with a feeling of longing, a longing for something real. Something that could survive beyond the facade of success and money. However, there was still a barrier between them, a wall that Olivia had carefully built around her true self. The truth was that she hadn't been entirely honest with Ethan. She had hidden who she really was. Not out of malice, but out of fear. Fear that once he knew the truth, that she was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, he might look at her differently. Fear that he would see her only as her wealth, not as the woman sitting across from him, sharing stories over coffee. Then one evening, after several days of uncertainty, Olivia found herself walking into the diner once more. She had finally come to a decision. She would tell Ethan everything. She couldn't keep hiding from the truth, not from him, and not from herself. But what she didn't expect was that the more she thought about it, the harder it became to say the words. The vulnerability she had once felt had given way to something deeper, something more raw and real. When she entered the diner, the bell chimed softly, and Ethan's gaze immediately lifted from his coffee. She was there again, but this time there was a sense of calm about her. He smiled in recognition as she approached, and a warmth spread across his chest. "Hey," she greeted him, her voice steady but tinged with a nervousness she couldn't quite hide. "Mind if I join you?" "Of course," Ethan replied, gesturing toward the empty seat across from him. The conversation that followed was easy, almost as if time had been suspended. They spoke about life, about dreams, and about the paths they had chosen, paths that, in many ways, had led them to this very moment. After a few minutes, Olivia's expression shifted, a subtle shift in the air as she set her coffee cup down and looked at him seriously. "Ethan," she began, her voice quiet but clear, "there's something I need to tell you." Ethan paused, sensing the shift in her tone. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes focused on her. "What's going on?" She took a deep breath, her fingers curling around the edge of her cup, steadying herself. "The other night, when you helped me, it meant more than you know. But I wasn't honest with you. And I owe you that. I'm not just someone working in business consulting." She began, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm the CEO of a company. Sinclair Enterprises. I've built it from the ground up. And it's worth hundreds of millions. I didn't tell you that because I was afraid you would see me differently." The silence between them grew thick, and Olivia's heart began to race. She couldn't look at him, afraid of what his reaction might be. Ethan, however, was still. He didn't speak right away. His brow furrowed as he processed her words. He had known there was something about her, something that didn't quite add up. But hearing the truth hit him harder than he expected. He had never cared about wealth. He'd spent his whole life working with his hands, fixing things, building things from scratch. He had always admired people who lived with purpose, not for status. Yet, a part of him felt betrayed, like she had hidden who she really was from him. It wasn't that she was rich, it was the fact that she had kept it from him. "I'm sorry," Olivia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I never wanted you to think I was pretending to be someone I'm not. I just wanted something real. Something not defined by my name or my wealth." Ethan took a deep breath, letting the weight of her words settle. He wasn't sure what to say, how to respond. The vulnerability in her eyes, the sincerity in her voice, reminded him of how much he had valued their connection, how much he had come to care for her. But there was still a part of him, deep down, that was struggling with the truth. "I don't know what to say," he finally admitted. It's a lot to process." "I understand," Olivia said, her voice quiet. "I don't expect you to just forgive me. I just needed you to know that I care about you. Not your life or your job or anything else. Just you." Ethan was silent for a long moment, the weight of her confession hanging in the air. Finally, he looked at her, his expression softening. "You don't have to apologize. But I just need time to think." Olivia nodded, feeling the weight of the conversation settle around her. "I understand," she whispered, the sadness in her eyes giving way to acceptance. She reached for her coat, her fingers trembling as she slid from the booth. As she left, Ethan couldn't help but feel a profound shift. He had known for a while that their connection was special, but now he realized how much he had invested in her. In them. It was not about her money, it was about her heart. And he was going to have to decide whether he was ready to accept all of her, or if he would let the fear of her wealth get in the way. As the days passed, Ethan found himself wrestling with his emotions. He had always believed that love wasn't about money, that it was about the connection, the shared moments that created something real between two people. But as the weight of Olivia's truth settled in, he realized it wasn't about her wealth at all. It was about the vulnerability she had shown him, the kindness they had shared, and the bond they had started to build. He couldn't let fear control him anymore. He had to take a chance on what they had. And so, one evening, he stood outside the grand event she was attending, a lavish gala filled with luxury and elegance. His worn-out dress shoes didn't belong on the marble floors. But he didn't care. He walked across the room, his heart pounding, his mind set on one thing, making things right. When he saw her, her face lit up with recognition, and the entire room seemed to fall away. "Olivia," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I was wrong. I let my fears get in the way. I told myself I wasn't good enough for you, that you deserved someone who could give you more. But the truth is, I don't care about your money. I care about you, who you are, not what you have." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes, and without another word, she closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that spoke of everything they had both been too afraid to say. From that moment on, they knew they had found something special, something real. Together, they built a life founded on love, trust, and mutual respect. Their journey wasn't defined by wealth or status, but by the quiet understanding that love was about seeing each other for who they truly were. For more inspiring stories of love and resilience, don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for our latest videos. Thank you for being a part of our storytelling community.